The city of Pittsburgh found its inception on the shores of three rivers. This strategic location, known as the Point, has led to immeasurable conflict due to its benefits in both military and trade. The Allegheny River, named by the Delaware Indians, is commonly translated to mean Fine River. It lies north of the Point, stemming from northern Pennsylvania. The Monongahela lies south of the Point. Meaning fallen banks, it finds its source in Fairmont, West Virginia. Along with the Nile in Egypt, the Monongahela flows north, and is one of the only two rivers in the world to do so. This compares Pittsburgh to Cairo, the crown jewel of the Nile regarding trade and economy, which would prove to be true in the development of the Point. These two rivers combine to form the Ohio, which would end up being the key to the West and the Mississippi.
This was the West. In colonial times, this was Western America. This was the edge of the frontier. I mean, this was about as far west as you could go and still have some semblance of civilization.
The Point offered great trading opportunities because of its natural makeup. The two rivers that create the Ohio allow whoever is in control to access the greatest trading advantage of the time and have power over it without any interference. The Ohio is one of the great Mississippi's tributaries. It provided access to the vastness of the unexplored continent.
It's important strategically for first the French and the British to be able to assert control over this area and to be able to assert that they, in fact, had dominance over this part of the New World.
Originally belonging to the Virginians and then taken by the French, Fort Duquesne was built by France in 1754 and was named after the governor of New France, Marquis Duquesne. The British made two efforts to regain control of the land. The first bloodshed of the French and Indian War coincided with the Brits' first attempt at regaining the Point. Led by George Washington, a group of British soldiers encountered a group of French soldiers and killed Commander Jumonville of the French. This act of violence led to a French counterattack at Fort Necessity, leaving the British in retreat. The second attempt was led by General Edward Braddock, who was killed in 1756, the year that war was first declared. The final attempt was a three-pronged attack created by British Secretary of State William Pitt. The British defeated the French, who burned down the fort because of the British advantage. The British then created Fort Pitt in the area between the three rivers.
Fort Pitt originally started as Fort Duquesne. It was a French outpost, and it was secured by the French in the time period before the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, as an attempt by the French to try to assert their control over this territory in what is now western Pennsylvania at the confluence of the three rivers, which of course was strategically important because of the waterways that were there, and also just in the overall attempt by the French and the British to jockey for position and territory in the New World. Eventually the French abandoned the post as the French and Indian War was continuing, and the British came and they established Fort Pitt, named after William Pitt the Elder. They used it as an outpost during the war. They also used it as an outpost not only to assert their control and primacy over the region, but also to defend against not only British attacks, but also attacks by Native Americans. At the conclusion of the French and Indian War, the fort did come under attack by a group of Native Americans, because the British had broken treaties with them, and so as a result of that, there was a siege of the fort. Eventually, the fort was too well garrisoned. The fort itself was eventually decommissioned in 1797 after the British left the territory, and this area started to become more populated, and that really is the brief history of the fort.
Today, the fort has become Point State Park, with a museum being created on the Monongahela Bastion. The other bastion shapes have been preserved but incorporated into downtown Pittsburgh, with other bastions being indicated by trees, concrete, and even road formations. Inside the museum, you can find displays of the structure and living conditions of the fort.
You are looking at a model of Fort Pitt and the early town of Pittsburgh as it appeared in 1765. Constructed between 1759 and 1761, Fort Pitt was the most elaborate fortress on the American frontier. Lord William Pitt ordered the construction of the fort to maintain His Majesty's subjects in undisputed possession of the Ohio. The fort itself covered all of what is now Point State Park. It was designed in the shape of a star, a pentagon with a bastion projecting from each corner, allowing its defense from all sides. You are now in the William Pitt Memorial Hall, which is inside the Monongahela Bastion. If you were to enter Fort Pitt in 1765, you would cross a triangular island called a ravelin. Two drawbridges protected the entrance to the main parade ground. The bridges would be drawn up during times of attack. The parade ground was bordered on 5 sides by the Commandant's house, a variety of storage buildings and barracks buildings that housed over 900 soldiers and officers. During Pontiac's War in 1763, these buildings became crowded with settlers running to the fort for protection from the advancing Native American warriors. The Commandant's house was the most elaborate structure in the fort. It was constructed of brick and trimmed in stone. Fort Pitt had 29 commandants between 1758 and 1786, after which time it was no longer assigned a regular garrison. The ramparts of the fort were constructed of earth taken from the ditch or moat which surrounded it. The largest portion of the ditch was known as the isthmus, and only filled with water when the river was high. The 15-foot-high masonry wall, which faced the land, never received the artillery fire for which it was designed, but this wall did help save Fort Pitt from the floods of 1762 and 1763, when water rose 11 feet above the parade ground. The King's Garden covered 10 acres, which included fruit orchards, vegetable and pleasure gardens, a deer park, and bowling greens. A stroll in the King's Garden provided a momentary break from the beehive of activity around the fort. In 1764, Colonel Henry Bouquet ordered 5 redoubts built as added defense against Indian attacks. One of these, the blockhouse, still stands as the only surviving building of the once mighty Fort Pitt, and is the oldest west of the Allegheny Mountains.
A single blockhouse from the era of the war remains outside of the Fort Pitt Museum. Blockhouses are composed of brick with rectangular-shaped holes and wooden planks that allow soldiers to fire upon their enemies and still maintain cover. They're angled slightly downward to prevent outside fire from piercing the blockhouse to minimize casualties. This particular blockhouse was built in 1764 to protect against Indian sieges after the war ended in 1763 with the Treaty of Paris. The interior is fairly small, but during battle could accommodate 10 to 20 soldiers if necessary. Blockhouses were built between bastions to allow for greater defense of the walls and the fort. The final remaining blockhouse stands between where the Monongahela and the Ohio bastions were positioned.
It was originally built as an exterior defensive post for Fort Pitt, so it was sort of like a first line of defense. So they put soldiers in here, and then they had the openings on each floor that they could fire out at anyone trying to attack the fort's walls. It's essentially to eliminate blind spots, because this is built between 2 of the bastions of the fort. So you can see like the museum is this kind of pointed shape that extends up to the sides of the building. And so by making this a pentagon, it allows them to see easily down all the sides of the blockhouse. There's nowhere somebody could hide along the building's walls. In general, they would have about 10 to 20 soldiers in the building at a time, so they wouldn't need to use all of the gun loop openings at once. It was unlikely they'd be attacked from every single side at the same time. And even if they were to fire out all of the gun loops at once, it would become so smoky in the building, they wouldn't really be able to breathe or see what they're doing. And so it would become pretty ineffective if they tried to do that.
During times of rest, soldiers could find temporary peace in the barracks. While they were not fulfilling any of their obligations to the army, soldiers could sleep, talk, or write letters or diaries. One of a soldier's duties besides combat and marching could be working in a casemate. Casemates were underground rooms built within the ramparts of the fort. They were built with timber in order to withstand the pressure of the earth that they were in. Casemates were used to create weapons and ammunition for the army's heavy artillery. The British Army primarily used 3 types of artillery. Cannons were not very maneuverable, but could supply a very heavy barrage of explosions very quickly, and was the most common form of artillery. The cannon was a smoothbore weapon, which resulted in lower accuracy and velocity, but could still be devastating. Mortars were another type of smoothbore weapon that were commonly used. Completely immobile, they would fire bombs into the air at a 45-degree angle, which would explode and injure many men at once with shrapnel. Howitzers were the most maneuverable of artillery. They were light and easy to aim. Like a mortar, a howitzer would fire bombs, but at a much lower angle due to a rifling of the barrel, which would lead to increased precision and velocity. Resulting from the state-of-the-art weaponry and innovative inclusions in the fort like trenches, blockhouses, and drawbridges, Fort Pitt would become and stay the most powerful fort of its time until its decommission in 1792.